a lot of people roll their eyes when I say it. And I think it's just because it's kind of an annoying step, but if you are to buy a property, if you're looking at an association, do your homework first, review the CC&Rs, see what information you get online, go to the court website, see how many lawsuits have been filed against the association.
That is an absolute great tip right there. I didn't even consider that. Review the CC&Rs. That's annoying and it can be long, but seeing how many lawsuits were against, go to the court and see how many lawsuits were filed against that HOA. Now that's interesting too. That gives you some really interesting insight.
I'm Luke Carlson, and for almost 2 decades, my law firm, LS Carlson Law, has been at the forefront of defending homeowners against overreaching HOAs. We're not just leading the charge, we've created the go-to playbook on how to fight back effectively. Join us as we delve into the world of HOA disputes, sharing insights from our extensive experience and landmark victories. Throughout this podcast, we'll bring you in-depth interviews, demystify complex legal principles, and provide practical tips to safeguard your rights. While the information provided shouldn't be taken as legal advice, our aim is to empower you with the knowledge, strategies, and real-life success stories needed to navigate and overcome the challenges posed by overreaching HOAs. Hi, Luke Carlson of LS Carlson Law. Welcome back to the show. Today I have Marty, our producer.
Hello there.
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for having me back.
We have a very special show today.
This is an exciting one. This is one I've been looking forward to since the inception of this podcast. This is one that I've always had in my back pocket, hoping that we would finally tackle.
Well, maybe we give an apology to the viewers because it took us a while to actually get to this point, to go through all the responses. Well, first, let's lay the foundation.
Let's do it. Yeah.
I'll let you take the lead, Or, because this is your baby, if you will. And I like it. I like the theory. I like how you approached it. But let's lay the foundation and sort of explain how we're going to tackle what has happened here.
So for those, many of you are familiar with Reddit. I mean, Reddit is a place where people can post anything and you get literally anything and you can get responses on those. Well, there's some really spicy subreddits specifically for people that really disdain their HOA.
Yes. And you've opened this world.
Yes, we've done a lot of in our previous podcasts. We usually end them with one post from, and then we throw you a curveball and you have to answer the question.
And I like that.
So this is an evolution of that. So we posted an AMA. So AMA stands for Ask Me Anything, and we said I'm an HOA lawyer from California. I exclusively represent homeowners. Ask me anything. And the responses were, I was not prepared for the amount of responses that we got. But I mean, it's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. You put it out there and say, I'm an HOA lawyer, ask me anything in a forum of people that really disdain or hate their HOA. I mean, it's going to be spicy.
It was a great response. I was impressed. The questions, I think, were wonderful. Not wonderful. I mean, I feel horrible that people are dealing with such bad HOAs.
Yeah, but they to the extent, I mean, they're spicy, they're clever, they're interesting,
and that makes sense. I mean, I've said this a million times. Individuals, homeowners living with an HOA dispute, it is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah,
and
it's their house. I mean, this is supposed to be where they get some relief from the real world.
Well, two things, right? It's their biggest asset.
Yeah,
often.
Yeah,
but it's also where they go to, sort of get away from the world in a way.
Yep.
Right? It's their kingdom.
It's their safe space.
And when that's under attack wrongfully, I absolutely get the frustration, the venom, and where they're coming from.
Yeah.
It makes absolute sense. And what's interesting too about, what we do in the HOA space is the homeowner dispute is so agnostic in a sense of it doesn't matter how wealthy you are or are not.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter your political affiliation. We really represent all walks of life.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you could be a very, very wealthy business person and you are impacted as equal as someone who's not, who's on the other side of that economic spectrum.
It's true. We see a lot of the spectrum is quite large.
It hits everybody.
Yeah.
And, I understand, from where they're coming from, even if you're sort of calibrated to dealing with a lot of disputes in your business life.
Yeah.
This hits home so hard.
Yeah.
And so, I think what we're seeing here in this AMA is really a reflection of what a lot of individuals are going through.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to jump in. Do you want to kind of walk us through how you want to tackle this? Because unfortunately, I think the vision was we were going to tackle all of them.
We were going to attempt to tackle everything, but we don't have 6 hours.
Yeah, or at least 6 hours. I mean, this could be 12 hours if we were thorough.
Yeah.
So what I think you and I both decided, and I agree with, is we're cherry picking.
We are cherry picking. There's some that they're multi-page, and we cannot get through. I mean, their questions are specific, and I think the point is, and we put there, it's not to give legal advice. It's to kind of give you the lay of the land.
Yeah, and again, I'm analyzing this from a California perspective.
Sure.
I'm a California lawyer.
Yeah,
and really, whatever I say, what someone should do is take it and run it by another lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm going to give my 2 cents on it. I'm going to give general insight into the question, but it's incumbent upon the homeowner or the individual listening to this to actually take this information, bring it to a legal professional.
Yeah. Well, there's some burning questions. I think the way that we kind of cherry picked were through the lens of you having consultations, meaning that you get these questions a lot, and it's worth putting it out there to the world, because if the people in the consultations are constantly asking these questions and the people on Reddit are constantly asking these questions, it's a burning question that needs to get answered.
Yeah.
So I think those are the questions that we took, that we compiled here.
Yeah. So let's jump in. We also have one compliment, which was amazing, which we'll get into.
We'll get there.
I flagged that one.
Yeah.
That was a very nice thing. And what's interesting about compliments in our space is, as an advocate for homeowners, we understand very deeply that often the homeowner doesn't want to deal with this dispute in the first place. They shouldn't have to be dealing with it.
Yeah.
If the association was just following the rules, regulations, abiding by their fiduciary, they wouldn't need to hire an advocate.
Yeah.
So we almost are a necessary evil in this process.
Yeah.
We're fully backing our clients, the homeowner. We're fighting the good fight. But at the end of the day, the homeowner would prefer not to be in this dispute in the first place.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and to some extent, you don't often get a lot of compliments.
Yeah.
Even though I think we do a great job. The attorneys do phenomenal work, but it's nice to see.
Yeah. Well, attorneys by nature, it's a stereotype.
It is, and it's a necessary evil. But lawyers do like a nice compliment every now and then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was cool to see that.
Well,
but anyways, let's jump in.
And I think it's worth noting that in the future, I mean, we'd love to continue to do this in the future. So although we don't have the time today to get through every single one of these things, I mean, this is pages of stuff.
We'd be here for a very long time.
I would love to do another one too. Let's
see what the response is.
Exactly.
If we get a lot of thumbs down, maybe we don't do that.
Okay, first one. Connect Stay 137. I would love horror stories as well as, quote, bad HOA gets karma, end quote, stories. And a lot of people want to hear this. I mean, it's right for the picking.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Often if I'm out casually, this is the question I always get when they learn that I'm a lawyer and I represent homeowners. What is the horror story? What is the worst thing you've ever seen?
This is the dinner party question for you.
It always is the dinner. And I have one in the chamber. I'm ready to answer this one because it's always the same.
Yeah.
We had a situation where the association went so far to contain a homeowner where our allegation became false imprisonment as a cause of action against the association.
So meaning they literally held them against their will?
In their unit and would not allow them to leave. That was the allegation. And it became a false imprisonment claim against the association. Now, to give it further context, this was during COVID, during the pandemic, and there were additional factors which, from the association's perspective, they thought they were doing the right thing by containing people in their condo.
Oh, meaning that, and I don't know if you're supposed to disclose, but meaning that they either they showed symptoms of COVID or had COVID and saying, "Hey, you can't come out. We're holding you there."
They shut everything down.
They shut everything down.
And absolutely, that was so beyond the pale and so beyond what any association it would ever be permitted to do. And it was, it's to talk about it now. It's not comical, but it's so outlandish. It's funny, but I mean, the reality is this was such a horrific experience to the client. I mean, talk about the ultimate nightmare scenario. Tragic, right?
They're paying to live in their safe space in their home, and they're not they're being held against their will.
Well, think about
from
overreach.
leaving.
Overreach.
That's huge.
And the power trip there was, I've never seen it before. I mean, that was a terrible situation. And without going into too many details, karma was served on that one. So, yeah, but that is the biggest nightmare I've seen hit our desk. And we've seen a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that one is probably at the pinnacle.
That's interesting.
So
That's
there you go.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. JC username. I want to know how hard it is really to dissolve an HOA.
Yeah, this is a common one. And typically the fact pattern is homeowner moves in, realizes that the association is a dumpster fire, and they say, you know what, in our wisdom, I think it's better just to disband.
Yeah.
Let's just become a normal community without any sort of regulation, without any sort of CC&Rs, no board, and life will possibly be better without the board. That makes sense. I get that. The issue is, and again, this is an analysis under California.
Yeah.
It's possible to disband. You can do that. But logistically, practically, it is, I'm not going to say impossible,
but near
impossible. And there's a lot of mechanics that go into something like this, and it's sort of a long sort of way to go about it if you were even to approach it.
Yeah.
And so what I think I'll do here, if you could assist on this, we'll put a link, at least in terms of California, what that process looks like. And we can explain sort of the ins and outs of it.
Yeah.
But long story short, if you think about it from more of a public policy perspective, if it was easy to dissolve, that would undercut the stability of most associations. Because run a hypothetical that is, you have an association that actually runs well.
Yeah.
It's functioning, and you have an outlier, someone who just doesn't like it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, if the bench was very low, and they say, you know what, I want to disband, and you have just a handful of disgruntled homeowners.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the association world becomes a very, you're building it on sand, if you will, as opposed to concrete.
Yeah.
And so I think it would threaten or undermine associations throughout the state if it was easy.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning too that I think that most people that are posting in here are just going to assume that you as an HOA attorney seeing all the nightmares are anti-HOA just by nature, which is not exactly true. I mean, you actually live in an HOA that to your point, and have made mention on many episodes, that functions well and you like living in, and the people that run it do a great job.
Yeah, so I guess the best way to say it is I'm anti-bad HOAs.
Yeah.
100%. I'm anti-bad management companies.
Yeah.
I'm anti-bad board members.
Yep.
I'm bad attorneys who work for the associations.
Sure.
Absolutely. Rightfully so. But, you know, on the other side of that coin, a functioning association is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it preserves property values when they're functioning.
Yeah.
There's this sort of harmonious feel to a neighborhood, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
And when they work, I think, fairly well. But the problem is when they don't work, they are so bad.
Yeah.
You know,
it's at home. Again, we keep harping on this, but it is at your home.
It's very, it can be a tremendously horrific experience. Yeah. And that's what I'm against.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't tout myself as someone who's anti-HOA and disband all HOAs.
Yeah.
Because there are good HOAs, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Now, from my perspective, I often don't see that. I see all the bad, and often, and that's what we're really rallying against.
Yeah.
And you know, really the purpose of a lot of what we do, especially on the show, is empowering homeowners who are dealing with the bad HOA.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, the whole thing's called bad HOA.
Right. But to empower them so they understand better how to approach a situation. And listen, and I've always said this, if you can do this without a lawyer, that's a wonderful outcome.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need it. Like I said earlier, it's a necessary evil.
Yeah.
And that's just part of sort of, you know, the system that we live in.
Yeah.
And so, again, you know, people watching the show, what I'm hoping they do is they walk away with some really tangible concepts. They better understand how HOA law works,
Yeah.
which would empower them, whether they're going to, fight the fight by themselves,
Yeah.
or if they bring on an advocate, they're going to be a little bit more, educated, wise. They understand the terrain better,
Yeah.
so they can use that advocate more efficiently.
Yeah, because I find the stories that are incredibly sad are the ones that this has gone on for years.
Correct.
And they put up with it for years, but they finally got to the point where they just couldn't take it anymore. They've been dealing with this for years. And I think a lot of the podcasts that I've found somewhat revealing and helpful are the ones that say, hey, take these steps. Here's the 6 steps that you could take without a lawyer and to get these things resolved quickly. And we have multiple episodes on different types of disputes and how to handle them. And then at what point to bring on a lawyer. So I think that's good. I mean, a shameless plug for for the other episodes, but it's good information.
Yeah. And then just briefly on that point, often when you have a homeowner, and what I've seen historically is someone who's dealt with something for years and years, the misunderstanding there is the belief that the HOAs have all the power.
That is something that I didn't think as well. And we can touch upon that, I'm sure, a little bit later in the episode. But I think that's a huge misconception that most people think the HOAs have all the power,
Correct.
Whereas the homeowner really does.
And so they sort of just take it and
Yeah.
accept it, and they keep their head down, and
Yeah.
they get grenades thrown into their mailbox or backyard all the time. And then one day they say, you know what, enough. I'm actually going to reach out to someone who might be able to help.
Yeah.
And that typically is the turning point.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that was disband. Or
Yeah.
I think that's a.
Okay. So NorCal Rain 3. This is where.
Oh, this is our compliment.
Yeah. Look at you doing God's work. Truly respectable, and it seems like it would be very rewarding. No questions. Just wanted to say thank you for what you do.
Okay, that was just a nice comment.
Yeah.
And I guess, of course, we wanted to draw attention to the nice comment, but it is very rewarding.
Yeah.
It is to be able to help homeowners, families get their lives back, to push back, to show an association that this is not a family you mess with. I mean,
Yeah.
that is rewarding. It
Yeah.
is. When they can now live their life without constant scrutiny or harassment or discriminatory practices.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a win.
Yeah.
And, as a lawyer, you feel very good about that.
Yeah.
Knowing that, hey, from moving forward, they have their lives back, or there has been a form of justice that's been served.
Yes.
And really bad people on an HOA, they got served karma.
Yeah.
Karma,
and I think many people want to, the majority of people want to see karma happen
Yes.
to these HOAs.
And I think rightfully so.
Yeah. Okay. Emberg 33, kind of a multi-stage question here. Let's get into it. Are HOAs really allowed to get away with almost everything with offenses labeled, quote, civil matters, when at worst it's like HOAs are acting like the mob? How is this not racketeering? At best, they leave you alone temporarily, since a quote unquote good HOA can be really bad or get really bad really fast, and people get stuck, even if HOAs break the law, or are they just annoying at times?
So
That's a deep one.
I thought this one was interesting because what they're getting at is you have certain HOAs that you could maybe even make an argument that they're acting in a criminal way. And what I mean by that is they might be embezzling, stealing funds,
Mm-hmm.
and really, breaking the law that may have criminal consequences, right?
Yes.
But often homeowners will go to maybe the police and they'll go to the authorities, and the authorities often will chalk it up as a civil matter. And so maybe that's where this question is going to. That was my interpretation.
Yeah. That doesn't mean that there's no recourse.
It doesn't mean that there's no recourse, but often if you were to go to the police, for example, and say, hey, the president is stealing money.
Yeah.
I have proof of it.
Yeah.
Often what an officer will do is say, you know what, this is a civil matter.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily wrong, because there is civil recourse,
Yes.
which is filing a lawsuit in state court or
Mm-hmm.
pursue civil options. So it's not that they can get away with it,
Yeah.
but it's often that the Attorney General, they're not necessarily going to prosecute because often they have limited resources.
Sure.
But you are empowered as a homeowner to actually enforce, at least in California, under the Davis-Sterling Act. You can enforce under the CC&Rs. You can go after them.
Yes.
Again, it's not criminal, but it's civil.
Yeah.
But civil is also an aggressive way to get a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't mean it's over. I mean, I feel like they think the lens of which they're viewing this is, they can get away with anything because it's not a criminal matter. Well, that might be true. That's not a criminal matter, but that doesn't mean that they can get away with anything and everything.
It might be a criminal matter, but no one's going to enforce, at least on the government side.
Yeah.
But that does not forego your ability to enforce.
Yes.
So I like this one because I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big misnomer because sometimes people do go to the authorities or they'll go to the Attorney General or they go to these different government agencies, and at least in California, you don't really see that much action from them. But again, you still have a huge avenue to go on the attack, to go on the offensive. It's just through civil.
And maybe this is a good point to bring up what we kind of mentioned before, is that the homeowner has tremendous rights. I mean, particularly here in California, I mean, the HOA can't get away with anything and everything.
Right.
They're bound by the Davis-Sterling Act and their CC&Rs. And that was, again, I've mentioned this before, but the one thing that really brought to light as doing this podcast was those CC&Rs, I always thought was the restrictions of the homeowner.
Right.
It was because that's what you assume, right?
Well, in part, it is partially a restriction.
Yeah.
When you move into an association, you are giving up certain rights. For example, you are not able to paint your house zebra. Maybe you wanted to.
Yeah.
But you can't anymore.
Yeah.
So you are giving up rights. But I think where you're going with this is
the fact that it also outlines the rules and regulations that the HOA has to adhere to.
Right. Their obligations to you as homeowner.
And now, correct me if I'm wrong, a good amount of the cases that you see, I would say, a significant amount of cases that you see, one of the things that you look at is, is the HOA breaking the CC&Rs?
Well, that's the starting point.
Yeah, that's the starting point.
Often we look at violations of the CC&Rs, and you have to understand the CC&Rs, it's a contractual relationship between homeowner and the board.
Mm-hmm.
So often it's articulated as a breach of contract.
Yes.
So we look at the CC&Rs, we run an analysis, and we say, okay, the board did A, B, and C. How did that violate this contract?
So that's when we go back to civil matters. That's the thing that they're violating.
Correct.
They broke the contract. They broke the contract of...
It's a breach of contract. It could also be a breach of fiduciary.
Oh, sure.
Because that's a big one. I mean, the association owes a heightened obligation, relationship, duty to the homeowner.
Yes. If they get on the board, they have a fiduciary obligation to serve to the homeowner.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. And so it might be a breach of fiduciary. You might also have negligence, and you might have violations of the Davis-Sterling Act. So there's a lot that we look at, and ultimately those causes of action really become the ammunition for the homeowner.
Yeah.
So you take a sort of articulation of a problem as this is a nightmare, they're horrible, and you run it through a lawyer or a legal prism, if you will.
Yeah.
What you're going to come out with on the other side is causes of action. That's what you're ultimately looking for. Because you can't go to a judge and say, hey, this is a dumpster fire.
Sure.
Or a jury for that matter. But what you can do is you can start saying, hey, this is a breach of contract.
Yeah.
This is a breach of fiduciary.
Yeah.
This is negligence, etc. And then that's how you go about sort of proving up and you look at the elements of that.
Yeah.
But that's the line of attack.
Yeah.
So, my goal has always been for a homeowner who's dealing with a really bad HOA to start articulating the problem with more precision.
Sure.
Because often when it comes in a very... it's out of focus, or it's it's not. It doesn't have the precision.
In other words, you don't know what they're violating.
Right.
They're being
broad
aggressive.
strokes. It's very broad stroke.
Yeah.
But what I want to do, and I want to help them do, is bring it into a more higher resolution.
Sure.
What are we actually looking at here?
Yeah.
Yeah, dumpster fire, living hell, nightmare. I get that, but what is it?
Yeah.
Well, this is a breach of fiduciary.
Yes.
This is a breach of CC&Rs, more specifically provision 6.31.
Yeah.
Now we're in a very high definition. I don't know what is it, 4K. We're talking 4K at that point.
I think they're up to 8 at this point.
8K, yeah, I'm a little behind. So that's what we're trying to do.
So yeah, one of the biggest, takeaways from this is, if there's a problem, look at your CC&Rs.
Correct.
That's the first place to start. If they're violating that's a good place to start. Say, hey, you're violating XYZ.
Correct.
And then see if you can get resolution there.
Correct.
Okay. Perfect. Fun tangent. Okay. Is there a way to leave? This is the second part of this question from Edberg 33. Is there a way to leave an HOA while keeping your house? There seems to be very little oversight and recourse for HOAs breaking numerous laws because cops just shrug their shoulders and say the dreaded phrase, it's a civil matter. Translates to many as it's only illegal if the victim is rich.
Okay, this is, I'm going to have to unpack some of this. So part of this ties into the first thing I said under 1.
Yes.
And this is the exact scenario that I was discussing. I don't think the knee-jerk reaction to call the cops is off. I get it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that is what a cop is going to say.
Yes.
So again, on that, your recourse is civil.
Yes.
And there's various ways of going about it. You don't necessarily always start with a lawsuit. There's other methodologies which we've discussed historically, which include IDR, informal dispute resolution, or ADR under the Davis-Sterling Act, which is alternative dispute resolution.
Yeah.
Those are efficient ways to start enforcing. And then if those methodologies don't work, then you contemplate whether a lawsuit makes sense.
So I think that's a perfect little tease just to say we have an entire episode on the 6 steps you can take as a homeowner to try to resolve an HOA dispute without an attorney.
Yeah.
And I think you can follow like steps 1 through 6. And so if anyone's looking to figure out how can I solve this myself, that's a great place to start. Is that.
And again, that's California centric.
Sure.
But take a look. At least you're going to have some language. So let's say you're in a different state.
Yes.
Then you run it past an attorney and say, are any of these applicable?
Yeah.
It's a good starting point for a conversation.
But by any rate, a lot of the tips in there, some of them were very California specific, but just like document everything. That's great for any state that is applicable to just about any.
Well, that's not legal advice. That's practical advice.
That's practical advice. But anyway, that's just a nice. We'll be here 12 hours if we go through each one of those things. But that's the episode is awesome. It's got a lot of traction. People like it. So this information's very potent and to the point. So check that out if you haven't. If you want to dive deeper in there. But let's get to the rest of this one.
Is there a way to leave an HOA while keeping your house? So this kind of has the elements of dissolve or annex.
Yes.
Getting back to that, very impractical.
Yeah.
Now, yes, there is a way, and one way would be to rent the house out, but I don't think that that's what they're getting at.
No, they're trying to get out of the HOA.
Yeah, and again, going back to annex, that's probably not going to work, or it's probably not practical.
Yeah.
But is there a way to leave an HOA while keeping your house? The only way I really see that is yes, if you bring in a tenant.
Yeah.
I'm not a tenant attorney, but I would imagine if you have a really bad dysfunctional HOA. You're probably going to have to disclose that on some level. That falls outside of my wheelhouse. But again, how do you have your cake and eat it too is maybe the question. Again, there is one practical piece of advice, and a lot of people roll their eyes when I say it. And I think it's just because it's kind of an annoying step, but if you are to buy a property, if you're looking at an association, do your homework first, review the CC&Rs, see what information you get online, go to the court website, see how many lawsuits have been filed against the association.
That is an absolute great tip right there. I didn't even consider that. Review the CC&Rs. That's annoying and it can be long, but seeing how many lawsuits were against, go to the court and see how many lawsuits were filed against that HOA. Now that's interesting too. That gives you some really interesting insight.
Now that doesn't tell you though. The one thing it's not going to tell you necessarily is how many ADRs have been filed, how many complaints, because some of that's internal.
Oh, sure.
But listen, if you see 5 or 6 lawsuits filed, that might be a red flag.
Yeah.
So I do think it's decent advice. Yes, I acknowledge it's annoying.
Yeah.
But let's say you spend 4 or 5 hours on that before you buy the house. It's a big, if you look at a due diligence for a large asset, 5-6 hours isn't that much.
That's true.
Ultimately, if you're weighing it, some people, if you're a buyer, you just want to buy, you just want to get in, you're excited. But I would
you
pause.
see yourself living there.
Correct. I would pause, spend some hours, look at the court website, check it out.
Yeah.
And you can avoid a lot of problems. Now, this won't solve the problem, though, of you move into a neighborhood that's wonderful and eventually it goes south because of a bad board steps in. That's a different scenario. That could happen, right? You assume the risk, I suppose. But I suppose, to any property that you've purchased, I mean, if you have neighbors, let's say you have a wonderful neighbor, that neighbor leaves, and a nightmare moves in next door. So, I mean, it happens in a number of scenarios.
Totally. So. All right. Let's keep on trucking here.
All right. What do we have next?
I think that's all the ones.
Oh, I had one that I wanted to bring. This is the last one I had.
Okay. Let's go through it.
So this one is Chicago 6065722.
You can summarize it.
Yeah, they have a number of questions, but this one I think is pretty universal, and I see this a lot. The question is, what happens if there is unequal enforcement of rules and the board gets sued? So getting to the sort of unequal enforcement, at least in California, the requirement is an equal application of the rules and regulations. So what we look for is targeting. Targeting is a big one. And what that means is you have an association or a board who's, finding one homeowner to the exclusion of others. Maybe this homeowner is getting parking tickets, but no one else is, right? Or said differently, you have, all of the friends of the board. They don't get any violations. Life is good for them, but everyone else in the community, is under attack or scrutiny.
Sure.
So that's an unequal application claim, and homeowners absolutely have rights in that scenario.
Yeah.
Now the other part is, what happens, if the board gets sued?
Yeah.
Well, that typically is what happens. It doesn't always start with a lawsuit, but someone gets fed up and they start to enforce. And typically that enforcement action is likely going to be maybe a violation of the Davis-Sterling Act, or a breach of the CC&Rs, or a violation or a breach of the fiduciary obligations.
Sure.
But, a homeowner in that scenario absolutely does have rights.
Yeah.
But again, you have to look at the application, and especially if it's unequal, and you can say, hey, this group of people, they never get violations. And then if you could especially tie it to some sort of relationship with the board, that's going to add to the argument.
Yeah.
But I like that question. I don't like that it's happening to people, but it's a question I see all the time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to at least comment on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the rest of the questions were very specific about a claim that they have in general.
Yeah.
That I know we're not, we're under the, not supposed to give legal advice without actually having a written contract with the lawyer, but and I'd love to go through a lot of these things. We'd be here all day.
Well, we'll see. Let's post this.
Yeah.
Let's get some feedback, and if the audience is enjoying it, we'll continue.
Yeah.
And then again, I think the strategy is really looking at the questions that are going to have the most value.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's all I have. Anything else on your end, Marty?
No, we have another episode coming up, which I'm excited about, which is kind of an extension of this, really, which is really the frequently asked questions that you get during a consultation.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I like that.
So it kind of is an extension of this. The questions that people did not ask are the ones that we're going to cover that you think will fill in the gaps here.
Yeah, I like this Q&A. I think that's informative because, done this for 16 years now.
Near 17.
We've been at it for a while, and you do see a consistent sort of grouping of questions.
Yeah.
And they're great questions. Yeah. So I really like that format.
Yeah.
So that's good.
So yeah, that's next week's episode. So I'm looking forward to it.
Same. Yeah. All right. Thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, leave comments, and we'll see you next time.